Hi, welcome to Café with Cavanha. Today we have with us Dr. Dale Rogers. He is professor of business at Arizona State University, top supply chain researcher worldwide. We invited him to talk about globalization. Good morning, Professor Dale.
Good morning, Cavanha. How are you this morning?
Fine, thank you very much. Recently, we saw a white paper calling globalization, deglobalization issues, worldwide speaking. Can you tell us a little bit about the possibility of deglobalization?
Well, there is a lot of uncertainty, for a lot of people, particularly in established countries. There's an old saying, when you've been living a life of privilege and all of a sudden you're equal, that feels like oppression. And so there's a lot of people whose lives feel threatened by all of this equality. Where I grew up in the United States, I live in Arizona now, but I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, right by Michigan State. And most of my friends from high school, secondary school, did not choose to go to college. I was sort of the rare one that went to college. And they went to work at Oldsmobile, which isn't even a car brand anymore, part of General Motors. They went to work at Oldsmobile, and they had great lives. I remember seeing a friend of mine in the grocery store when I was struggling financially and trying to get through graduate school, and he told me, "Oh yeah, I'm making $30,000 a year." This is probably like 1980 or something. I'm making I think it was $35,000 a year. I have 2 cars. I have a house plus a cottage up in northern Michigan. And he had barely finished high school. He didn't go to college. And I know $35,000 isn't a lot of money now in 2018, 2019, but it was a lot of money in 1980. He was telling me, "Why did you do all that college? Because I'm doing better than you'll do after you graduate." Well, that's not really true, but so many of the people that I grew up with believed that. Well, when we started shipping manufacturing offshore, and I don't know if you've heard, but General Motors just announced they're shutting down 5 more plants in the U.S. President Trump went crazy. A lot of people were angry about it. But the truth is that economically, it makes more sense to move that stuff offshore. And most of the car that's being manufactured, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but a big portion of the cars that are being manufactured, assembled in the U.S., the parts are actually being fabricated outside the U.S., Mexico, China, so on. And truthfully, we have moved into a global economy, and that's been threatening to a lot of people. It explains a lot of the crazy, well, I say crazy elections. It explains Brexit a little bit. The UK, who used to be sort of the greatest power in the whole world, isn't anymore, and they feel their sovereignty slipping away. In the United States, Trump, who is the craziest president we've ever had, he won on sort of a statistical fluke, but he won because of all of those non-college educated, mostly white men who feel sort of threatened by the changes in the global economy where they come out worse. So there is a discomfort. There does feel like being a threat, but the truth is that we're not really going to go back to where it's just country by country. if you look at, I mean, you can compare the U.S. economy and the Brazilian economy.
Mm-hmm.
I love Brazil, as you know. I enjoy my time down there. I love being part of ELOS. See, I say ELOS like a karaoke.
And every year you come to here to teach. And
yes, every year I do, and I love Brazil. But the closed borders have damaged the economy in Brazil, not strengthened it. And the U.S. economy being open, I mean, all economic theory, pretty much every economist says that free trade is better than closed trading. Pretty much every economist says that, and it's clear that it's true. And yet here in the U.S. we want to maybe slow it down because of this discomfort, and some of the people in the U.S. lose their status compared to other people making lower wages in China or Mexico, and that feels threatening to some Americans. But Brazil, very closed. America has been open. Which economy is better? Well, clearly the U.S. And look at Chinese economy prior to 1975 or so. It was terrible. It's not completely open, obviously, but it's opening up. And they're now the second. I mean, they've been the largest economy in the world. I think they're second again. I think we're first again. But it's clearly globalization is good for the economy. It's just not good for everybody that's in the economy. That's the hard part.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and because globalization means the minimum total costs, I suppose. And can political issues influence these decisions of globalization?
Yes, it can. Yeah, absolutely. Globalization means that you look for the best supplier at the best cost, and it's usually best total cost, wherever they are around the world. And, it used to be the technology tended to stay in a country, but now it flows around the world very quickly. I mean, a big thing was the installation of the internet, where you kind of virtually moved countries closer together. We were just talking last night at dinner with our kids. We got 3 kids that live here. I got 5 altogether. You've met Zachary, who's in Colorado State, but we got 3 that are here. And this week, the last 2 graduated from college, so it's kind of fun. We were sitting last night, and we were talking about the cost of long distance phone calls. Mm-hmm. Back when I started dating their mother, and Dina didn't really want me to spend a lot of money all the time calling her. She was in Grand Rapids, which is only 60 miles away from Lansing. Mm-hmm. And I, our phone call could be $30 or $50 or something like that. And of course, today we use the internet, and this call with you, which is video, costs nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a very different world, and we've kind of virtually moved the countries and the continents next to each other. And we're not going to go backwards on that. Yeah. I think we're going to continue to progress, but it is going to cause large political problems. Mm-hmm. In Brazil, you elected a Brazil first politician, Bolsonaro. Mm-hmm. We did that with Trump. The Brexit thing is we don't like some other group making rules on our sovereignty. We're seeing discomfort, particularly among sort of the lower uneducated levels who aren't really prepared for globalization, and I don't think we're going to go backwards, but there is some pushback on these large changes.
So there are two countries that call attention. China, of course, because the increasing GDP they are doing, and England, UK, because of Brexit and some difficult decisions they have to take. How can you analyze these two countries for us?
Well, Brexit, is about several things. Excuse me. One thing it's about is, what does it mean to be British? The immigration into the UK has been mostly from former Commonwealth countries, where the people don't look like the British people that live in the UK. I mean, they're from Africa, they're from all over the world, Pakistan, India, and the British feel like, hey, we're not British anymore. At the same time this is happening, globally, many countries, this is the craziest thing, Cavanha, many countries are voluntarily kind of choosing to become extinct. How do I mean that? Well, I think the replacement level population, in other words, to keep the population at the same level, every woman in the country needs to have 2.3 children, each one, because some kids die and so on. So you don't just need two to replace two parents, you need 2.3. And every place in Western Europe is well below that. Japan, way below that. Japan's at like 1.6 or something. And many young many young people are either choosing not to have children or choosing to start having kids much later than you used to see. So as a result, the established populations tend to be declining. It's estimated that by 2050, Germany, which has 80 million people, will be down to 60 million because the birth rate is just lower. In the U.S., the birth rate is lower, but we've sort of maintained our population growth level mostly flat through immigration. Well, that feels threatening to some people. Notice that the pushback in immigration in the U.S. comes from the Republican Party because the new immigrants, the new Americans, tend to vote Democratic, and so it's threatening to the established order. In the UK, Brexit was a lot about, hey, we're the United Kingdom, and we want to make decisions about who can be here and who can't. And also, if you were putting a manufacturing plant in Europe, would you put it in the United Kingdom, or would you put it in Poland or someplace like that that's much lower cost? Turkey, someplace. Well, probably you would put it in the UK. You would make the stuff in a lower cost country and then distribute it into the UK. Maybe have a distribution center close to there, or in the UK, but you're not going to put a plant there generally. Well, that's a problem. I mean, look at Ireland, how that's thriving. That was a third world country. Well, China is a much more controlled place, but you can even see issues starting to bubble up in China around this same issue because costs are becoming too high to manufacture in China in some industries, not in all, but for example, apparel. So when you make clothes, I mean, almost anybody can sew, any country can sew. So if you look at, like, for instance, shoe manufacturing, that's steadily, slowly, but steadily leaving China and going to places like Vietnam, which are much lower cost countries than China. China's response has been different than most of the rest of the world because China doesn't really listen too carefully to their people. It's not a democracy. But what China has been doing is developing their One Belt, One Road initiative. I don't know if you've heard about that, but One Belt, One Road, where they want to be sort of the logistics service provider for that whole part of the world. They're going to connect the world because they can see a lot of the manufacturing as their costs continue to rise is going to leave China. So they're going to be the folks that kind of structure the flow of product, similarly to what the UK has done and the US has done for a long time. Some large investors in Brazil have been able to do that. But you know, it's a time of dramatic change where globalization pays huge dividends to some of the people in a country, but is a negative thing for a lot of the other folks in the country.
So they are talking about supply chain. The trend is to, let's see, be stronger, the supply chain worldwide speaking, or with this unstable situation can be weaker, I mean?
Well, you know, there's a couple ways to answer that. It's a great question. Supply chain managers right now are scrambling because of some of the changes we've just experienced in the last year. For example, the Trump trade policy, most anything regarding the president, I'm showing my politics a little bit here, is chaotic. I mean, crazily chaotic. And some people think, well, that's great. It's hard to negotiate with a crazy man, but I think, well, it's still a crazy man. So I don't think that is good. But for example, companies that are like electronics companies, like I was talking to a vice president just the other day, supply chain for a large computer company, and they have to make decisions about where to put manufacturing. They don't make their computers themselves anymore, but they outsource it to suppliers. Well, where should that be? Should they take everything out of China because of the tariff? Should they move to Mexico? What about Vietnam? There's a lot of uncertainty right now because the laws within countries seems to be fluctuating so much. And more than any other place, the U.S. is not stable right now. Hopefully we'll go back to stability, but clearly right now we're not a stable partner. I mean, it's way different. And truthfully, businesses, whatever country they're in, the US, Brazil, France, England, like stability. You like to know what the rules are because you have to plan ahead. And so you know, is supply chain getting stronger? Right now, it's a very chaotic time globally. And within a firm, the folks that guess right will have very strong supply chains, but the folks that guess wrong won't.
Great. So no deglobalization, no desupplychain, only unstable
Well,
thing.
there will be elements of deglobalization, I think. I mean, I think you've really already seen over the last 40 years in Brazil, I think you've seen a suspicion of globalization. You know, I remember our friend telling me, look, Dale, we have our own China up in the north, you know, we don't need to outsource to a low-cost country. You look at the port infrastructure in Brazil, up until just very recently, it's been kind of bad, actually. It's been pretty terrible because there is a suspicion all throughout Latin America that if you allowed globalization, you'd be taking advantage of it. Kind of harkens back to some of the radicals, Che Guevara, and some of those guys who were sort of anti that, and that ideology was a lot more popular in Latin America than it was up here in the north. And truthfully, some of the countries in Latin America, most of them, have suffered pretty badly from nationalization of industries and stopping imports. You know, you're better off long run if you have more open borders. But I think over the next few years, I mean, who would have thought that an American president would try to move us in the direction of Brazil? Who would have ever thought that?
Yeah, I hope so.
But it works from an electoral perspective. People will vote for that, even if it's unwise. And so honestly, yesterday was a big day in the U.S. We're talking about this in mid-December 2018, and there was a couple revelations about the president which are going to be threatening to his long-term tenure as president. He's going to end up at least probably not getting reelected. Maybe he will, but he's in big trouble. And so I think we'll probably go back to normal U.S. policy. But I worry about, sort of my second country, Brazil, because there's a lot of political uncertainty there as well. Yeah. And people desperately want good lives, and the choices they've had to make, to move towards financial stability and success have been limited in the last few years. Yeah. And I think for Brazil, there's a huge cost to those closed borders. I think that costs a lot. I remember having a bunch of Brazilian guys, and we do that course every year where we tour around, and we were at Microsoft a few years ago here in the US, and Microsoft was talking about their Brazilian partner, and I won't say the computer company's name, but you would know it. And the American woman from Microsoft was so proud of this partnership. And our friend Cesar got just crazy mad. And the other people, she asked, how many people have this brand of computer? And because they were all managers and executives, everybody said, absolutely, we would never have one of those. But it's not as good of a computer, but it's designed, manufactured in Brazil, so it has a cost advantage. Yeah. And the other brands, which have to manufacture in Brazil because of the closed borders, are always limiting production down there. Mm-hmm. And they don't a lot of times bring their newest stuff to Brazil, certainly not in large quantities, because of how difficult it is to get through the borders. Yeah. So so the people in Brazil don't have access to the very best
Machines.
because of the closed border policy.
Yeah.
Now, is that overall good or bad? I would say bad, because if you look at where the new businesses are coming from in the US, it's kids with computers that are figuring out how to become Facebook or Google or whatever those. I mean, there's thousands of those new startups here. It's harder to do those in Brazil. Even though you're starting to see them, it's harder there because of the closed borders, I think.
Yeah. More rules than production.
Exactly. Cesar always tells me, he goes, look at the size of your Constitution versus our Constitution, Dale. And yours is like a page and ours is like a book. And he tells me, he goes, you know, when you have a book, you don't really pay attention to it, but you guys take your Constitution seriously. And I think there's some truth to that. One of the things that the Republicans and Trump have been doing that's probably good is reducing regulation here, because we've you know, so I think that's actually, I think that's one of the reasons we've had such a positive economy, which it looks like we could be moving into a recession, but we've had such a positive economy, partly because of the tax cut, but also because of the deregulation.
Deregulation, exactly. We need the same in Brazil. Yeah, we need the same.
Yeah.
Excellent thoughts, Dale. Thank you very much for your speech with us, and we appreciate you having Professor Dale Rogers with us today. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's always great to be with you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Okay.